Some people never scream, they never cry, they never lose control. They seem emotionally stable, mature, even spiritual. But if you've ever lived with someone like this, you know, there's a tension in the air, a quiet pressure, like standing near a fault line before the earthquake. Carl Jung warned us, the stronger the persona, the darker the shadow. And some of the most disciplined people you know are hiding something, not because they're bad, but because they were taught to be good at all costs. So they sealed off their anger, their sadness, their needs. And now, they don't feel them anymore. But you do, in the way they control, judge, withdraw, explode. This video will change the way you look at calm people. You'll understand how emotional repression works. You'll see how some turn their shadow into moral law and punish you for breaking it. You'll recognize why love sometimes feels like exile, and you'll finally learn how to protect yourself from someone else's internal war. If you've ever been made to feel too emotional, if you've ever censored your truth to keep the peace, if you've ever felt like you were punished for saying how you feel, then this video is for you. Because repression isn't control, and silence isn't peace. And the sooner you see that, the sooner you stop getting burned by other people's shadows. Some people don't explode. They implode. Quietly. Secretly. Over years. And while the world sees someone calm, composed, maybe even enlightened, those closest to them feel it. That tension in the air, that uneasiness that creeps in without explanation. Carl Jung called this the shadow self, the parts of us we refuse to acknowledge. But just because you deny something doesn't mean it disappears. It grows in the silence, in the stillness, in the spiritual bypassing disguised as peace. One missed text, one change of plans, and suddenly, the person snaps. Not because of the event, but because of the weight they've been carrying, pretending it wasn't there. Most people don't think of repression as violence, but it is. It's emotional violence turned inward, then projected outward in bursts. A person who never cries, never complains, never burdens others may think they're strong. But what they're actually doing is stuffing every wound into a box with no lid. That box lives in the unconscious mind, leaking into their relationships, their energy, their sense of safety. Until one day, the box bursts, and the people around them pay the price, not for today's mistake, but for a lifetime of unprocessed pain. The worst part? They call it honesty, as if this eruption was some righteous release. But it's not truth. It's an emotional explosion years in the making. Repression doesn't happen by accident. It's taught, passed down like furniture in a poor man's home. You don't talk about emotions. You survive them. You numb them. You bottle them. Especially in working-class families where struggle is constant and there's no space for vulnerability. Crying gets labeled weakness. Anger becomes dangerous. And before long, a child learns that the only way to be loved is to not feel too much. So they wear the mask. They play nice. And they spend their lives looking calm, while their psychological shadow seethes beneath the surface, desperate to be acknowledged. This shadow doesn't just carry pain, it carries power. Shadow integration isn't about becoming dark, it's about becoming whole. Inside that repression lives vitality, creativity, sexual energy, raw truth. But when someone seals it off in the name of goodness, they don't just lose their anger, they lose their joy, their spontaneity, their authenticity. Life becomes muted, predictable. And when anything threatens that fragile balance, a delay, a disagreement, a confrontation, they overreact. Not because they're evil, but because their system was never designed to handle reality, only to survive it. Think of it like this: a house with one room permanently sealed. At first, everything seems fine, but over time that room fills with pressure, with mold, with heat. And eventually, it explodes, damaging the entire house. That's how repression works. You can't delete a part of yourself without consequence. The longer you ignore it, the more distorted it becomes. This is why emotional repression isn't harmless. It's delayed destruction. And no matter how peaceful someone looks on the outside, if they've never faced their shadow, they're a ticking time bomb. The most heartbreaking part? These people often believe they're helping. They think that by staying silent, by avoiding conflict, by rising above their emotions, they're protecting others. But they're not. They're protecting themselves from themselves. And anyone who gets too close starts to feel the cost. You begin to edit yourself. You smile more, speak less. You walk on eggshells, not knowing what invisible tripwire you might hit. And suddenly, you're not in a relationship. You're in a psychological minefield. And the worst part is, they still think they're the calm one. Repression wears many faces. Some call it discipline. Others call it spirituality. But when peace comes from avoidance, not understanding, it becomes a prison. Jung warned that the stronger the persona, the darker the shadow. When someone clings too tightly to being the good one, the mature one, they begin to judge anyone who dares to feel openly, and that judgment is projection. What they hate in others is what they can't bear to admit in themselves. That's not maturity. That's emotional cowardice dressed as virtue. And sooner or later, it poisons everything it touches. But here's the truth. No one is born this way. They were trained to be this way. By trauma, by poverty, by a society that rewards silence and punishes sensitivity. And healing doesn't begin with blame. It begins with recognition. The first step isn't to express everything. It's to stop pretending nothing's there. To finally admit, yes, I'm angry. Yes, I'm tired. Yes, I'm overwhelmed. Because until that happens, there is no peace, only pressure. And that pressure always finds a way out. In the next section, we'll meet the moral controller, the person who turns their repression into a weapon and calls it righteousness. You've met them, the ones who speak in rules, who never raise their voice, but always raise the bar. Everything must be appropriate, mature, positive. They preach calmness, forgiveness, patience. On the surface, they seem like models of emotional health, but spend enough time with them, and you begin to feel small, ashamed, unworthy, not because they yell, but because they don't. And their silence, their disapproval, their tightly held principles cut deeper than any insult ever could. Carl Jung saw it clearly. When we repress our shadow, we don't kill it. We moralize it. We turn it into judgment, not just of ourselves, but of anyone who dares to live freely. The moral controller doesn't express their emotions. They manage yours. They correct your tone. They shame your sadness. They minimize your anger. And slowly, you begin to doubt your own reactions. Was I too emotional? Was I wrong to feel that? This is not guidance. It's gaslighting wrapped in a spiritual robe. Their emotional repression becomes a lens through which they view the world, and anyone who reflects what they've buried becomes a target. You become too sensitive, too reactive, too much. But the truth is, you're not too much. They're just too disconnected from themselves to tolerate someone who isn't. This kind of repression often comes from a need for control. When someone's inner world feels unsafe, they try to create order in the outer world. That's where moral rigidity is born, not from wisdom, but from fear. It's the adult version of, if I follow the rules, no one will hurt me. But it goes deeper. If everyone else follows the rules too, I'll finally feel safe. That's why they correct you, why they insist things be just so. It's not about you. It's about their own unhealed chaos. And instead of facing it, they turn you into the battlefield where their order must be enforced. Living with a moral controller is like being in a courtroom every day. Everything you say is evidence. Every emotion is a possible crime. And when they do express themselves, it's not in vulnerability, it's in verdicts. Calm, cold judgments that make you question your worth. And yet, they'll say they're just being honest. But it's not honesty, it's projection. Their own shame, anger, and fear are too unbearable to face, so they call it principle and punish others for not living up to it. This is how the unconscious mind defends itself, by attacking what it can't accept within. There's a dangerous elegance in their behavior, because it doesn't look like abuse. It looks like structure, discipline, maturity. And that's why it's so hard to name. You won't see screaming fits or slamming doors. You'll see a slight eye roll, a disapproving silence, a condescending sigh. But it hurts more, because it makes you feel like you are the problem. Like your joy is childish. Your pain is inconvenient. Your needs are embarrassing. And over time, you shrink. Not because they told you to, but because they made you feel like you had no right to take up space. Ironically, the moral controller often sees themselves as the emotionally mature one, the adult in the room, the one who rises above drama. But real maturity isn't repression, it's integration. True strength isn't about never feeling. It is about knowing what to do with what you feel. Jung warned that the shadow, when denied, will leak into the world disguised as virtue. And that's what happens here. Their psychological shadow becomes policy. Their fear becomes doctrine. And now, you're not just in a relationship, you're in a regime, where the price of peace is your authenticity. But this isn't just about relationships. This dynamic plays out in families, workplaces, communities. It's the boss who dismisses feedback as negativity. The parent who quotes scripture but can't say, "I'm sorry." The partner who claims emotional superiority but goes silent every time conflict arises. These people don't explode. They erode. They wear you down with perfection, drown you in expectations, and call it love. But it's not love. It's control disguised as care. And the saddest part? They think they're doing the right thing. Because no one ever taught them that repressing pain doesn't purify the soul. It poisons it. Still, there's a door out. But not for them. For you. The first step is to stop negotiating with their rules. You don't need permission to feel. You don't need approval to cry. You are not less evolved for being human. You are allowed to be messy, loud, imperfect, and still be worthy of love. Because here's the truth. Their standards were never about you. They were a shield, a survival strategy. And in the next section, we'll look at what happens when you live under someone else's war, with no armor of your own. Living with someone who represses their shadow isn't just exhausting, it's disorienting. At first, you can't quite name what's wrong. Nothing big happens. No screaming, no dramatic scenes. And yet, you feel drained, muted, like you're slowly disappearing. That's because you're not living with a person. You're living with a performance, a carefully managed image, a fortress built to avoid discomfort. And every time you express a real emotion, joy, fear, sadness, anger, it's treated like a threat. Not to the relationship, but to their illusion of control. You're not just walking on eggshells. You're walking through a battlefield where the war isn't yours, but the wounds still are. This isn't an emotional home, it's exile. Because to survive, you start censoring yourself. You say less, smile more. You suppress your needs just to keep the peace. But this peace is a lie. It's silence, it's self-abandonment. And the longer you live this way, the more you forget who you are. You become the emotional caretaker of someone who refuses to care for their own inner world. And it's not always obvious. Sometimes they'll praise you for being so grounded, or so calm. But what they're really saying is, thank you for not triggering me. Thank you for hiding. This is the quiet violence of emotional repression. Not just the damage it does to the person repressing, but the collateral damage it inflicts on everyone around them. Over time, you begin to internalize their discomfort. You judge your own emotions. You call your needs too much. You even feel guilty for being hurt. This is the mind-bending effect of long-term exposure to someone else's unconscious mind. You start believing their version of reality. You become afraid of being fully alive, because aliveness in their world is chaos. So you numb out, shrink, freeze. But here's the twist. Many of these people were once just like you, sensitive, expressive, human. But somewhere along the way, they learned that feeling was dangerous, that emotions make you weak, that survival meant silence, and so they shut themselves down. And now they expect you to do the same, not because they're evil, but because they're afraid. And the more disconnected they become from their shadow self, the more control they exert over others. Not through cruelty, but through quiet moral pressure, through expectations, through perfection. And if you dare to break that mold, they won't explode. They'll withdraw. And that withdrawal feels like abandonment. Or worse, judgment wrapped in ice. So what do you do when love feels like exile? When presence feels like absence? When being yourself feels like betrayal? First, you stop blaming yourself. This isn't your fault. You didn't create their war. You're just caught in the crossfire. Then, you start reclaiming your space. Little by little. You cry without apologizing. You laugh without filtering. You speak up even when it trembles. You remember that your emotions aren't dangerous. They're data. They're part of your humanity. And no relationship that demands you erase that is worth sacrificing your soul for. Jung taught that healing begins with shadow integration. Not just seeing what's hidden, but loving it back into wholeness. That's true not only for the repressor, but for those who've lived in their orbit. You've likely buried your own rage, your own grief, your own vitality. But none of it is gone. It's waiting. And when you finally stop walking on eggshells, when you finally say, "I'm done pretending," something shifts. You move from exile to return, from survival to presence, from repression to power. And it won't be easy, but it will be real. And real is worth it. Still, many stay. Out of loyalty, out of guilt, out of love. And that's understandable, especially when the repressor is family, or a long-term partner, or someone you feel responsible for. But you can't heal someone by becoming less of yourself. You can't shrink small enough to make another person feel safe. That's not healing, that's sacrifice. And too many people mistake it for love. Love isn't silence. Love isn't submission. Love is truth with tenderness. And if your truth feels like a threat to someone, that's a sign. Not that you're too much, but that they've been taught to accept too little. The tragedy of this dynamic is that it often lasts for years before anyone names it. And by then, the damage is deep. But naming it is the beginning of the end of exile, the end of walking on eggshells, the end of protecting someone from their own psychological shadow. It's not your job to carry their pain. Your job is to carry your truth, to live fully, freely, and fiercely. Because the shadow isn't evil. It's a part of us crying out to be seen. And in the final moment, those who repress it will either make peace with it or continue to destroy every relationship that dares to hold up a mirror. So now you know. What you've been feeling wasn't in your head. It wasn't oversensitivity. It wasn't weakness. It was the side effect of living near someone who denies their own truth, while quietly unloading it onto you. And here's the truth. You're not here to be their container. You're not here to stay small just to keep someone else in control. You've tried walking on eggshells. You've tried staying silent. But peace built on your self-abandonment isn't peace. It's performance. It's exile. It's a slow disappearance of your identity. You don't need to be perfect to protect your space. You just need to stop pretending you're fine when you're not. Stop smiling when you want to speak. Stop excusing the weight of someone else's war on your chest. Ask yourself this: whose pain are you carrying that was never yours to hold? How much of your life have you edited just to avoid conflict? And when do you finally choose to stop surviving and start living? Start today. Say one thing you've been holding back. Let your truth rise, loud or quiet, messy or clear. And if this video helped you feel seen, understood, or just a little less alone, subscribe and turn on notifications. You've been carrying others long enough. Now it's time to carry yourself.